he inherited Mrs May's appalling surrender treaty, and he did it with the clock running down to the 31st of October. And I don't doubt for a moment that he tried his best to improve it. And perhaps the one significant achievement was that Great Britain is not committed to being in the customs union, but the price of that was appalling.
Neave Barker has more from London.
The Brexit Party was formed in January this year by Nigel Farage, the former leader of the UK Independence Party. Nigel Farage has been at the centre of Brexit politics for many years now. He's been a thorn in the side of multiple prime ministers and essentially goaded the former Prime Minister David Cameron into holding the referendum in the first place. The Brexit Party did very, very well earlier this year in European parliamentary elections, winning more seats than all of the established political parties. But Farage knows there's a big difference between a European parliamentary election and a general election, which is why he's come up with a plan. He's asked Boris Johnson to scrap his withdrawal agreement to leave the European Union. If he doesn't, he says that the Brexit Party will put forward candidates in every seat in the country. The logic is that if Johnson agrees to this, then the Brexit vote won't be divided between the Brexit Party and the Conservatives, and Boris Johnson can hold on to his hopes of getting a majority in Parliament. Farage is calling for a non-aggression pact, asking for the Conservatives not to stand in 150 seats around the country, where the Conservatives have never won, because Farage believes his party can win those seats, especially places where the opposition Labour Party is now in control, places where the majority of people in those constituencies voted to leave the EU. Well, Johnson's been given until November the 14th to consider this possible arrangement with the Brexit Party. Johnson has ruled out in the past any possible pact between Farage and himself. Johnson is very confident that his party can win a majority, but he can't afford to be complacent. His deadline of October the 31st for leaving the EU has now been and gone. There's a lot of anger and frustration amongst Eurosceptics and ardent Brexit supporters who may decide to punish Boris Johnson when they go to the polls in December.
Well, for more on this, we can speak to Jonathan Lis, who's the Deputy Director of the think tank British Influence, a pro-Europe think tank and a business advisory group, and he joins us now live from London. Jonathan, I want to start by taking stock, because it's now the 1st of November and Britain is still very much a part of the European Union. Surprised?
Not at all surprised. Anyone who followed EU and UK politics for the last couple of months should have known that Boris Johnson had very little chance of getting a deal through by the 31st of October. And even last week, Boris Johnson was insisting that this deadline would be met. It's clear that it couldn't be met, and that makes Johnson look both dishonest and weak.
Well, we've now had 2 British Prime Ministers lose their jobs, essentially because of Brexit. So Cameron, May, now potentially Johnson. So heading towards this election, what is going through Boris Johnson's head, do you think? How confident is he?
I think that Boris Johnson is defined by his confidence. That's why he was determined that we would leave on the 31st of October, even though Parliament was saying we wouldn't. So I don't think confidence is the issue for him. I think that the real problem he has is that he has broken this cardinal pledge he made to leave the EU by the 31st of October. He has also angered people who are in favour of no deal by nailing his flag to the mast of a deal. And of course, he's infuriated the unionists in Northern Ireland and elsewhere in the UK by agreeing a treaty which puts a border in the Irish Sea. And that's where Nigel Farage comes in, because he knows that the only chance he has is to try and claim those voters who are now disillusioned with Boris Johnson. But how successful he is will determine the whole election.
Well, so given all of that, how united are the big parties here? Because this election is for British leadership, but it won't necessarily resolve all the big Brexit questions. Talk us through the options for voters here.
So I think that Brexit posed a problem for all the parties, and that is why the Labour Party in particular will want to talk about issues way beyond Brexit. So we're going to hear a lot about the rigged the rigged sort of financial system, for example. We're going to hear about the failures of capitalism. We're going to hear a lot about the NHS. And the Conservatives will also try and make a big claim about the NHS and their spending commitments, while the Liberal Democrats will try and claim the territory of stopping Brexit by being the revoke party. So what we may well see in this election, which is the most unpredictable in 30 years, is that the Remain vote will split between Labour and the Liberal Democrats in many seats, which could hand seats to the Conservative Party, and the pro-Brexit vote will split between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party, which could actually hand seats to Labour or the Liberal Democrats. So we simply don't know what's going to happen, but as things stand, the Conservatives look set to be the biggest party, even if they don't get a majority.
Jonathan, just taking a bit of a step back, it's now been nearly 3.5 years since that first referendum. And you're in London. How is the country feeling now? Divided, certainly frustrated, presumably asking some pretty big existential questions?
I think Britain is completely divided and it shows no signs of changing. The country has sort of been battered politically, socially for the last 3.5 years now. So there's a sense of exhaustion that we simply don't know how to make this stop, and we don't know how to make things better. And that's really what the parties are all going for. The Liberal Democrats and Labour are offering a route to stop this by having a referendum. The Conservatives are saying we need to get Brexit done. But the problem with that is that Brexit is not going to get done. If we do leave the EU, that's when Brexit gets begun, because that's when the negotiations begin. And the parties are simply not being honest about that at the moment.
Jonathan Lis there, the Deputy Director of the think tank British Influence. Thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera, Jonathan.